On Wednesday, I came across 2 copies of this. This is Anne and her sister Susan, who you'll see tomorrow, who's the CEO of YouTube. That was you two at the summit in the original Most Powerful Women's Summit in 2008. So it's kind of fun.
We talk about it all the time, actually.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do you?
We talk about what it's like to have to sit on stage with each other.
You haven't done it that often, have you?
We have not done it. I've started doing it with my other sister.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
okay.
We'll have to get her next time.
We'll have to. So very, very quickly, Anne started co-founded 23andMe, genomics company in 2006, with the long-term goal of revolutionizing healthcare and curing major diseases. She got slammed big time 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, by the FDA, who said you can't sell personalized health information to consumers without our approval, and you don't have FDA approval. And then suffered for two years, and then in October, about 5 weeks ago, the FDA gave 23andMe clearance to provide health information to consumers on a more limited basis than you had been doing before. So why don't you explain, first of all, what the more limited basis is?
So I see it as a step one. Like in some ways, like once we got our warning letter, it was like, okay, well we have to take a step back, not necessarily in the vision of what we are doing as a company, but the reality, this was sort of a speed bump, like a big speed bump, and we had to go through the FDA to get an approval as a medical device, and that we now have established a path forward. So I look at this as sort of like, if it's a 2-part series book, this is chapter 1 in that 2-part series. Like we've established this new path forward. We came back with the carrier status test. So that means like you can now buy online from 23andMe things like cystic fibrosis testing and a number of other carrier status testing. And what was revolutionary that we're able to do is to show that users actually can understand this information without having a genetic counselor and without having a physician. And so part of what we did while the time we were not returning health information is really like better understand all the feedback that we'd ever gotten and put that into sort of this new report design, and now we've launched that. So the next stuff to come will be sort of the old reports like, you know, Parkinson's disease, genetic risk factors, like Alzheimer's, as well as some of the drug response we're hoping.
So right now, if I am a 23andMe customer, and you actually raised your price from $99 to $199, right? If I pay $199, I can spit and get my test results. And by the way, I got your kit a few years ago when we first got to know each other, and I was always afraid to do it, frankly. And I actually may be more brave in doing it today, because if I send you my spit now, what you can tell me is not my own personal risk for 36 diseases, but the likelihood that my risk for passing it on to an offspring. Is that correct?
Correct. So and that's part, like we have both some of the fun elements. Like one of the things that we have too that people love is the ancestry. And people love understanding. Like even when I was getting my makeup done, we were talking about like somebody who's of Indian descent was surprised, like, oh, that there's actually a lot of European and other parts in there. That so we all think that we know what our background is, but it's always different when you look at it from a genetic perspective.
You're like 1% Asian, aren't you?
So and it gets into the small tail. And for me, what was interesting is my mother's Jewish and my father's Catholic, but my father's Y chromosome is from sort of the Kohanim, like the Jewish rabbis. So as much as we grew up with all this tension, and we now joke like, oh, Dad, but like you're secretly like, you're like a rabbinical Jew in your deep ancestry here. So people learn all kinds of interesting stuff. What we're returning to you now on the health side, some of the fun things like the traits, like why is it that you have blue-green eyes, and caffeine consumption, like how much coffee should you really be drinking, so lactose intolerance, things like that, as well as things like cystic fibrosis.
So Anne, what's the smartest decision you made during this 2-year crisis?
I think honestly one of the smartest things that we do is we don't read our press. And part of it is more like, for me, one of the things that we keep getting this feedback now, they're like, wow, for the investors, people who've been part of the Series A, like, it's amazing. Like, the vision for 23andMe has not changed. And it has been, for me, it's so obvious. Like what we said that we were going to do when we raised money in Series A is exactly what we're executing on. And when we had the FDA warning letter and we've had other issues, like they're just bumps. It's just a problem to solve. And I think part of what we've really learned is that like you can solve all these problems. Like nothing was insurmountable. It was just a question of figuring out the solution. And I think one of the things that when you have a laser focus, when you get distracted by what other people are saying about you, I think you can lose your laser focus. And so for me, one of the things, like we just buckled down. Like as soon as we got our warning letter, like I spent 10 days in my pajamas on the phone with lawyers, just figuring out, like just getting feedback. Like what is it that we are going to do?
And what's the best piece of advice that you got?
So one of the best pieces of advice I got was actually from someone at Genentech, from the regulatory team there, and she said, it was a whole team of them, and they actually said, they're like, look, you have two choices. You could either figure out a quick fix where you can just sell the company, you get it done, there's a way around, or if you're really looking for the long-term change, sometimes you just have to do the hard work. And they're like, if you're in this game for 10 years, well, then you just you figure out how you work with the FDA, because by working with the FDA and by working with the regulating body, you're going to actually drive the change. And as much as I'm proud about what we've done for ourselves, but I also feel like we've actually opened up an industry where other people can start to show like there is a direct-to-consumer path. And I think we all hear about this more and more, that direct-to-consumer healthcare is coming. Like people talk about the consumer. Like, do you have to go to your physician for everything? Do you have to go for a blood test? Do you have to go for all your genetic information? Like more and more, how is it that you can actually get this information in a way that you're going to be able to understand it?
So drug development, that is something that you're interested in long term, or maybe not even so long term, maybe shorter term. Tell me about how you're thinking about that.
So again, part of the vision for 23andMe, when I was on Wall Street and I walked away with two ideas based on the experience of investing, and one was that the consumer really doesn't have a voice in healthcare. And I wanted, with the new technology like your genome, wanted to bring the genome first to the consumers rather than wait for sort of the traditional medical world to adopt it. The second thing I saw was that every single year it becomes more and more expensive to develop a drug. And if you imagine that it became more and more expensive every year to make a computer, like at some point it would seem ridiculous. So the hope here was that if I started with a huge data set of information that was powered by the consumers, and that it was, instead of having a static data set of human subjects where you can only ask them a certain number of questions and you never engage them, you never turn this information, create a dynamic community of people. And the one thing I had learned really was when you talk to groups like Susan, like anybody who's ever had a disease, you want to make a difference. So you want to actually participate in research if you know it's going to help yourself or your family or other people. So then let's give people a channel. And instead of treating them like you're the human subject, I'm not allowed to like really engage you, like it's too scary for you to get all this information, like engage them. And so the hope here with drug discovery is that we're going to help better understand the molecular basis of disease, and by having all this information that we'll be able to have a better guess about drug targets and actually understand the disease, and can we actually make drug development cheaper.
And you're already doing that with Parkinson's disease, isn't that right?
So I'd say one of the big things we did is we hired Richard Scheller, who ran research and development at Genentech.
Okay.
And so he has known the company. We joke at sometimes, like, did it take 8 years to hire him, or did it take 5 minutes? Because as soon as he retired, I'd sent him an email, we got together, and it was a pretty quick match.
And when did you hire him?
In the April 1st, which I always had to clarify was not a joke.
And what diseases is he focusing on?
He is taking an unusual approach from the drug discovery perspective, where he's saying, I'm going to follow the data. So we go through all, 23andMe has over 1 million people. We have over 300 million data points of health data points on all of our customers. Mm-hmm. And so you can do these things, these genome-wide association studies, where you can look to see, is there a genetic basis for a disease? Or I can look at a phenotype, so something like asthma, and say, what are the different genes that are associated with people who all say they have asthma? Uh-huh. Or is that associated with anything else, like coffee consumption? Uh-huh. And part of it, because it's an ongoing database our customers return information all the time, we can ask new questions about, like, when the dress came out, when it reached a level of mania, we sent a question out to our customers saying, what color do you think the dress is? And people loved it. You know, we had an 80% click-through rate when customers wanted to know, is there a genetic basis of why they're seeing that?
So Anne, pick the number you want, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what will 23andMe, where will 23 be getting its revenue? And more specifically, what percentage of the revenue will come from direct-to-consumer sales?
That's a great question. My board asked me questions like that. You know, drug development is always hard and it's unpredictable, but I think that the consumer business, like fundamentally we are a direct-to-consumer company, and I think that that is always going to be our customer. I think in the long run, say 5 to 10 years, you're obviously potentially going to have a significant business from drug discovery. So I think in that 5 to 10 year time frame, it starts to shift.
So 23andMe has a valuation in the private market of, what is it now, 1.1 billion. You recently raised 115 million, led by Fidelity. I think in total you've raised 241 million, is that right? And are you using much of this new money to get into the drug development space?
So I'd say the capital definitely went from like executing. So once we knew we were relaunching. So the marketing program for that, the relaunch, we're working hard to actually make sure that we could actually get additional tests out to customers. So that might be the Alzheimer's test. It could be additional cardiac tests, like cancer tests. Like there's a bunch of other genetic tests that we know customers want. So we want to make sure we could introduce those, as well as obviously funding the drug development division.
So in watching this interview from 2008, you said something. So Anne was a bio major, a biology major at Yale. She worked in the hedge fund business in New York for 10 years. And what, you started 23andMe at what age?
Roughly 10 years ago, so I'm 42, 43, so yeah, 33.
Okay, 33. Not until you were 33 did you figure out what you really want to do.
Yeah.
So this is what you said.
I'm still evolving. Yeah.
I don't think, you said this in the interview with your sister Susan, you said, I don't think you should have a real job until you're 28, 29, 30. For all these women in this audience, whether they're entrepreneurs or they're working at big companies, what do you mean by that?
I think there's a huge amount of pressure for people to figure out what they want to do, and I think more like when I think about, like, I'm so happy with what I do, and my career to getting here was pretty random. Like I was a nanny, and then I randomly got this Wall Street job, and I originally turned down the Wall Street job because I loved being a nanny, and then my dad at one point convinced me that that was a bad idea, and so. You know, I didn't know anything about Wall Street. I was on Wall Street suddenly, and the set of experiences that I had, the good and the bad, like in some ways just being opportunistic and following what I was interested in allowed me then to eventually have a career and a job that I'm super passionate about. And so for me, it was more about, like when I talk to people in their 20s, I think about like finding things that you're interested in, but being okay to quit and move on. And I think that's where I'm always shocked at people who are in their 20s who are afraid of quitting. And I'm like, it's the best time. Like you should try, like don't be afraid to actually try switching jobs. And I think one of the best things too is to try to find a job where you have a great mentor. And I think like my rule of that always is I wouldn't work for somebody again who was new in their role and trying to prove themselves, because then they have no time to mentor me. But finding a great mentor is almost just as valuable as like learning something, like being in a job that you love, because you'll learn so much from that person. Right. So I do still stand by that. Like I think in your 20s you have this unbelievable opportunity, especially before you have kids and you're settled down. Like I think back on those days, I'm like, what did I do? Like you had so much time, and so you can definitely quit. You can quit and do all kinds of things. So I definitely encourage people to quit more.
Okay, that's the instruction from Anne Wojcicki. Think about quitting your job tomorrow. Anne, thank you so much.
Thank you, Patty. This way?
Okay, I'll see you.